She did not cry when she found out. She did not scream. She did not throw anything. She did not call her friends in hysterics or post anything on social media or show up at his hotel room demanding answers. She picked up her phone. She called her attorney, and she said 4 words that would take 14 months to fully detonate. She said, "Let him think he's winning." Here is what her husband knew. He had the house, the company, the girl, and a very expensive lawyer. He had served his wife of 14 years with divorce papers on her birthday. He had moved his 26-year-old girlfriend into the bedroom they had shared, the kitchen she had designed, the life she had quietly, methodically, invisibly built from nothing. Here is what her husband did not know. His wife owned the building his company operated from. She had been depositing his rent check into her LLC for 8 years. She had saved his career, his reputation, and his ability to call himself a success, with her money under her name documented in a notarized agreement with a clause he had never read. And his own mother had been waiting for 6 years for him to give her a reason to use it. By the end of tonight, he would lose the house, the company, the girl, and something no attorney could recover, the certainty that he had ever been the one in control. This is the story of Caroline Whitfield, and it starts the night everything looked like it was over. Lesson Statement. What you are about to hear is a reminder that the most powerful thing a person can do is build something real, document it carefully, and wait. Patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And the woman everyone underestimated, she was never losing. She was just not ready to show her hand. If this story is already pulling you in, stay with it. Every chapter gets heavier, and the moment this man finally understands what he has done is worth every minute of the wait. And when it is over, if it stayed with you the way we think it will, hit the like button, drop a comment telling us which moment hit hardest, and share this with one woman in your life who has ever been told that what she built was just a hobby. Subscribe if you believe that quiet strength wins in the end, because it does. It always does.
The courtroom was very quiet for a Monday morning. Caroline Whitfield sat at the plaintiff's table in a charcoal blazer, her hands folded on top of a yellow legal pad on which she had written exactly nothing. She did not need notes. She had memorized every number, every clause, every page of every document that her attorney, Patrick Hale, had spent 11 months assembling. She had read them the way other people read novels, not for information, but for the pleasure of knowing exactly how the story ended. Across the aisle, her husband of 14 years, James Whitfield, sat beside his attorney Victor Crane, who was whispering something urgent into James's ear. James was nodding, with the practiced confidence of a man who had never once in his life considered the possibility that he might be wrong about something important. He was about to consider it. Judge Patricia Donnelly looked over her reading glasses at the room. She was 61 years old and had presided over 412 divorce proceedings. She had seen cruelty dressed as grief, greed dressed as principle, and cowardice dressed as righteousness. She had developed a reliable instinct for the moment when a room was about to change temperature. The room was about to change temperature. Victor Crane stood and presented James's financial disclosure. Sterling Tech, valued at $380 million. Marital assets including the Greenwich Colonial, 2 investment accounts, a vacation property in Vermont. He spoke with the measured confidence of a man holding a strong hand. Then Patrick Hale stood up. He slid a single document across the table toward Victor Crane. He did not announce it. He did not editorialize. He simply placed it down and stepped back. Victor picked it up, read the top line. His expression did not change, but he went very still. The stillness of a man whose hand has just stopped being strong. James leaned over and read it. The number at the top of the page was $4.2 billion. James looked up. He found Caroline's eyes across the room, and for the first time in 14 years of marriage, James Whitfield had absolutely nothing to say. Caroline picked up her pen. She wrote one word on her legal pad. She underlined it twice. The word was, finally. 18 months before that courtroom, on a Tuesday evening in October, Caroline Whitfield sat at her home office desk at 11:45 at night and signed the closing documents on a commercial real estate acquisition in Nashville, Tennessee. The property was a mixed-use development, 42 units, ground floor retail, rooftop terrace. Acquisition price, $18.7 million. Projected annual return, 9.4%. Her third acquisition that quarter, her 41st overall. She capped her pen, stacked the documents into a neat pile, and swiveled her chair to face the window. The backyard of their Greenwich colonial was dark. The rose garden she had planted the first spring they moved in was invisible in the October night, just a suggestion of shapes in the moonlight. She had lived in this house for 12 years. She had chosen the paint colors, the kitchen tile, the hardware on every cabinet door. She had planted that rose garden herself on a Saturday in April. While James was at a conference in San Francisco, she had called him that evening to tell him the first blooms were opening. He had said that was great and asked her to find the number for room service because the hotel app was not working. She remembered thinking, this is fine. This is just how it goes. 14 years in, you stop narrating every moment to each other. That was maturity. That was a real marriage, not a romance novel. She turned from the window and looked at the wedding photograph on the shelf above her desk. They were 29 and 32. James was laughing at something off camera. Caroline was looking at him with an expression she now recognized as pure, uncomplicated faith. Faith that the man in front of her was exactly who she believed him to be. She could not remember the last time she had looked at him that way. She could not, if pressed, remember the last real conversation they had shared. Not logistics, not schedules, not decisions about Lily's school or the house or the calendar, a conversation. The kind where you say something true and the other person receives it. She turned off the desk lamp. Down the hall, their daughter, Lily, was asleep. 11 years old, obsessed with marine biology, deeply committed to the position that the mimic octopus was the most underrated animal on the planet, and that anyone who disagreed was simply not paying attention. She had her father's cheekbones and Caroline's stubbornness, and a laugh that could fill a room without effort. Caroline stood in the doorway of Lily's bedroom for a moment, watching her daughter sleep. Then she went to bed in the room she shared with a man who had been working late for 8 consecutive months. She did not yet know what the late nights meant. Or rather, she had begun to know in the way you begin to know something before you are willing to say it out loud. There is a particular texture to a lie you are not ready to confront. It sits at the edge of your awareness, like a word you cannot quite remember, present and shapeless and patient. Caroline was not a woman who permitted herself shapeless things. She had built a $4.2 billion real estate empire on the principle that every asset had a defined value, every risk had a quantifiable probability, and every decision had to be made on information rather than feeling. But this was not a business decision. This was her marriage. And so she chose, for 8 months, not to look directly at what she was already starting to see. She would look back on those 8 months later and understand them differently, not as weakness, as mercy, a kind of grace period she extended to herself, to the life she had built before she was ready to admit that the life had already been building something else entirely behind her back. The night she finally stopped extending that grace was not dramatic. It did not arrive with confrontation or revelation or any of the theatrical mechanisms that stories usually assign to turning points. It arrived with a phone call from her 11-year-old daughter. Her best friend, Meg Calloway, had been visiting that particular Saturday, eating leftover pasta at Caroline's kitchen counter with the ease of someone who had been letting herself into this house for 16 years. Meg was an emergency room nurse with zero tolerance for pretense and an uncanny ability to identify the thing no one in the room was saying. She had been saying it for approximately 4 months. "He's cheating," Meg said, for what Caroline estimated was the 14th time, stabbing a piece of penne with more emphasis than the pasta required. "I've seen this face on 1,000 women in the ER waiting room. It's the face of a woman whose husband thinks she's too smart to suspect him, which somehow makes her the perfect person to deceive." "You've diagnosed my marriage from pasta," Caroline said. "I've diagnosed your marriage from 14 years of observation and a nursing degree," Meg said. "The pasta is incidental. Caroline, he is gone 4 nights a week, and he smells like a different fabric softener. You don't use fabric softener. You use those little dryer balls. The dryer balls could be anyone's. I'm serious." "I know you're serious." Caroline set down her coffee. "I'm just not ready." Meg looked at her for a long moment, then she nodded. She understood the difference between denial and delay, and she knew Caroline well enough to know this was the second one. So she had another piece of pasta, and they talked about Lily's upcoming science fair project and did not mention James again for the rest of the afternoon. 3 hours later, Lily called. She was supposed to be on a school trip to the Science Museum in Hartford, returning Sunday evening. The trip had been shortened by half a day due to a scheduling conflict Caroline had not been informed about. "Mom," Lily said. Her voice was careful in the way children's voices get careful when they are trying to protect their parents from something. "There's a lady here, in our kitchen." Caroline's hand tightened on the phone. "She made herself a smoothie in your Vitamix," Lily continued, "and she's wearing Dad's college sweatshirt. The blue one with the tear in the collar that you offered to fix, and he said, 'No, leave it.'" The Vitamix, the sweatshirt with the tear in the collar. It was not the infidelity that broke something open in Caroline's chest in that moment. It was the domestic specificity of it. The sweatshirt, the Vitamix, the Saturday afternoon comfort of it. This was not a hotel room situation. This was someone who had been here before, many times, who felt at home in Caroline's kitchen, who knew where the blender was kept. "Okay, sweetheart," Caroline said. Her voice was very steady. "I'm on my way." She hung up. She looked at Meg. Meg put down her fork. "I'll drive," Meg said. "No," Caroline said. "I need to do this part alone." She did. Caroline drove the 12 minutes home in silence. She did not turn on the radio. She did not rehearse what she would say. She drove the way she managed every difficult thing in her professional life, with her full attention on what was in front of her and none of it on what she was feeling, because the feeling could be processed later, after the information was gathered and the situation assessed. She pulled into the driveway. The kitchen light was on. She went in through the side door. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table with her backpack still on, eating an apple with the deliberate focus of a child who has decided to be very interested in the apple. At the counter, a young woman stood with her back half turned, 26, maybe 27, dark blonde hair, good bone structure, wearing James's college sweatshirt, the blue one, the one with the small tear at the collar, and what appeared to be yoga pants. She had a smoothie glass in her hand. She turned when she heard Caroline come in. For approximately 3 seconds, neither of them spoke. Then the young woman, who was, as Caroline would learn, Savannah Cole, lifestyle influencer, 4.2 million Instagram followers, and James's primary extracurricular activity for the past 9 months, said, "Oh." Just that. "Oh." Caroline looked at her daughter. "Lily, go upstairs and unpack your bag." Lily went without a word, casting one backward glance at her mother that contained more emotional complexity than most adults could manage. Caroline set her keys on the counter. She looked at Savannah Cole with the same expression she used in boardrooms when someone presented her with a number she already knew was wrong. "You should probably go," Caroline said. Savannah set the smoothie glass in the sink. She picked up her bag from the floor by the refrigerator. She knew where to put her bag. She had a spot for it. There was a spot for her bag in Caroline's kitchen, and she walked out the front door without making eye contact. James arrived 11 minutes later. He came in through the garage, loosening his tie, already composing whatever explanation he had prepared during the drive. He stopped when he saw Caroline sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded and no particular expression on her face. What happened next was the thing Caroline would return to over and over in the months that followed, not because it was the worst moment, but because it was the most clarifying one. James did not apologize. His first instinct, the reaction that arrived before conscious thought could edit it, was irritation. His face arranged itself into the expression of a man who has been inconvenienced, who has come home to find a problem where there should not be a problem, who is, fundamentally, annoyed. "Caroline," he said, "can we not do this right now? Can we not do this right now?" She had cooked in this kitchen for 14 years. She had chosen the countertops. She had planted the rose garden outside that window. She had signed the mortgage. She had, in a very literal and documented sense, paid for this house. And her husband's first response to being caught was to treat her presence as an imposition. She stood up. She picked up her keys. "I'm going to Meg's," she said. "Lily is upstairs. She needs dinner. Caroline, just let me—" "James." She looked at him very directly. "Whatever you're about to say, write it down first, because I'm going to remember every word of this conversation for a very long time, and I'd like you to have thought carefully about what you want those words to be." She left. She drove to Meg's apartment and sat on Meg's couch and drank tea. She did not taste, while Meg sat beside her and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing. After a long time, Caroline said, "He was annoyed." Meg said, "I know. Not sorry, not scared, annoyed, like I had interrupted something. I know. 14 years. I know." Caroline set down the tea. She looked at her hands. She thought about the Nashville acquisition documents she had signed earlier that evening. 42 units, projected return 9.4%, 41st overall. She thought about the wedding photograph on her office shelf. She thought about the sweatshirt with the tear in the collar that he had not let her fix. "Okay," she said finally. "I'm going to need Patrick's number." The separation happened the following week. James moved to the Four Seasons in Stamford. Savannah's suggestion, as it turned out, because the Four Seasons had a rooftop pool that photographed well. He hired Victor Crane within 48 hours. Victor Crane was the most aggressive divorce attorney in Connecticut, which was a competitive category. Victor's opening letter to Patrick arrived on a Thursday. Patrick called Caroline and read it aloud. The letter referred to Caroline as Mrs. Whitfield. It described James as prepared to be generous. It suggested Caroline focus on securing a comfortable transition rather than an adversarial process. Patrick's voice, when he finished reading, had the tone of a man tasting something unexpectedly offensive. "He called you Mrs. Whitfield," Patrick said, "in a letter about taking your assets, while his client is currently staying in a $500 a night hotel at her expense. The audacity is genuinely artistic. How long do we have to respond?" 30 days. "Good," Caroline said. "Let them think we're scrambling." "And are we scrambling? Patrick, pull up the Whitfield Capital Holdings corporate filing, then call me back." There was a pause on the line. "Caroline," Patrick said slowly, "how much does James think that company is worth?" "He thinks it's my little property hobby," Caroline said. "He's been calling it that for 9 years." Another pause. "I'll call you back," Patrick said. The first deposition was held in a conference room on the 14th floor of Victor Crane's firm in downtown Hartford. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows, a long mahogany table, and the particular brand of aggressive calm that expensive law offices cultivate like a crop. James arrived in a charcoal suit and the confidence of a man who had never seriously lost at anything. He had sterling tech. He had the house, or so he believed. He had Victor Crane, who charged $900 an hour and had not lost a contested divorce proceeding in 4 years. He looked across the table at Caroline with an expression that was trying to be sympathetic and landing somewhere closer to patronizing. She was wearing a dark blue blazer and had her hair pinned back and looked, James thought, exactly like herself. Composed, a little remote, the way she always looked when she was managing something. He had always found that quality a little cold. It had never occurred to him that it might be something else entirely. Victor presented James's financials with practiced efficiency. Sterling Tech. Current valuation, $380 million. Marital real estate, combined value, $4.1 million. Investment accounts, personal savings, the Vermont property. He laid it out like a map with a clear destination. And the destination was James, walking out of this marriage with the majority of what he considered his. Then Patrick Hale opened his folder. He placed a single document on the table. He slid it across without ceremony, the way you might hand someone a grocery receipt. He sat back in his chair and waited. Victor picked it up. His expression did not change. Experienced attorneys train their faces into neutrality the way actors train for stillness, and Victor was very good at it. But something around his eyes shifted. A very small recalibration. He passed the document to James. James looked at the top line. Whitfield Capital Holdings. Audited net assets. As of the most recent fiscal year, $4.2 billion. He read the number 3 times. Then he looked at Caroline, then back at the number. The sequence of his thoughts was visible on his face in a way that would have been almost poignant if the circumstances had been different. "That's," James said, and stopped. He reorganized. "That's impossible. She doesn't know anything about real estate," Patrick said pleasantly. "She's been the controlling shareholder and managing director of Whitfield Capital Holdings for 9 years. The company currently holds 340 commercial properties across 11 states. It employs 67 people. It generated $412 million in revenue last fiscal year." Victor was already making notes on his legal pad with the rapid efficiency of a man reconstructing his entire strategy in real time. Patrick continued. "The company's flagship property is a mixed-use development in Nashville that closed escrow last Tuesday. Mrs. Whitfield signed the documents the same evening Mr. Whitfield was, I believe, at dinner with Ms. Cole at a restaurant in Stamford. We have the receipts for both events, if that would be helpful, for context." "The building," James said suddenly. He was staring at something in the middle distance, his face doing the arithmetic. "Sterling Tech's headquarters." Purchased by Whitfield Capital Holdings in 2016, Patrick confirmed. Your rent check clears to her LLC on the first of every month. Has for 8 years. James looked at Caroline. She had said nothing since she sat down. She had simply been present, her hands folded on the table, watching the room understand what she had quietly built while everyone around her called it a hobby. She did not smile. She did not need to. I think, Victor Crane said carefully, we should request a brief recess. Of course, Patrick agreed. The room emptied except for Caroline and Patrick. Patrick poured himself a glass of water from the carafe on the table. He drank half of it. He called it a hobby, Patrick said, for 9 years. 9 years of $400 million annual revenue. He wasn't paying very close attention. Patrick set down his glass. How are you feeling? Caroline considered the question genuinely. She looked out the window at the Hartford skyline. Somewhere in this city, James had been building a life alongside hers, parallel and invisible, and she had been building something too. The difference was that she had done it intentionally, methodically, with full awareness of every number and every risk. Honest answer, she said, always. I feel like I've been waiting for this exact moment for about 11 months, and now that it's here, it's both exactly what I expected and somehow still a surprise. Patrick nodded. The brain's funny that way. The door opened. Victor Crane put his head in. We'd like to discuss a revised approach, Victor said. Of course you would, Patrick said, and stood up. Caroline stood up too. She buttoned her blazer. She walked back into the room where her husband was sitting with the expression of a man who had just discovered that the game he thought he was winning had been a different game entirely. She sat down across from him. She picked up her pen. She wrote one word on her legal pad and underlined it twice and did not show it to anyone. That evening, she called Meg. How'd the deposition go? Meg asked. He finally asked how my day was, Caroline said. There was a pause, then Meg laughed, and Caroline laughed, and for exactly 4 seconds, it felt like the worst of it might be behind them. It was not behind them, not even close. The custody filing arrived on a Thursday, 3 days after the deposition. Patrick called at 7 in the morning. Caroline was in the kitchen making Lily's lunch. Turkey on whole wheat, apple slices, a note tucked into the side pocket of the lunch bag, the way she had done every school day for 4 years. A habit she had started when her work travel increased, so that Lily would open her bag at noon and find something from her mother, even on the days when her mother was in Nashville, or Chicago, or Portland. James filed a motion, Patrick said. Caroline set down the sandwich knife. What kind of motion? Emergency custody motion. 40 pages. Victor put it together fast. Probably had it drafted before the deposition as a contingency. What grounds? Patrick was quiet for a moment, which told Caroline the grounds were going to be personal. Absent and workaholic mother, Patrick said. Prioritized business empire over child's emotional development. They pulled your travel records. 67 nights away from home in the past year. They obtained therapy notes from a session Lily had 18 months ago, in which she mentioned, in the context of a discussion about friendships, feeling lonely sometimes. Caroline was quiet. They're arguing that Lily's primary emotional attachment is to James, Patrick continued, and that uprooting that attachment would cause developmental harm. He didn't know the name of Lily's science teacher, Caroline said. Last year or this year? I know. He missed her birthday in 2nd grade because he had a board meeting he did not reschedule. I know, Caroline. We'll document all of it, but I need you to hear what we're dealing with first. She heard it. All of it. And then she sat down at the kitchen table with the filing in front of her, and she read every page. It was the most disorienting document she had ever encountered. Not because it was entirely false. That would have been easier. It was disorienting because it was a version of her life that had taken real things, real absences, real long nights, real missed moments, and reframed each of them as evidence of a character flaw rather than the cost of building something. Every late night in the office, neglect, every business trip, abandonment, every hour she spent on the phone managing a property acquisition instead of sitting on the couch, failure. She turned the pages, and she found her own life described back to her as a prosecution. Some of it was exaggerated, some of it was distorted, and some of it was true in the specific, literal sense that made it hurt in a way the exaggerations did not. She had missed a school play in 3rd grade. She had been in Denver for a closing that could not move. She had watched the video Lily sent her from backstage 3 times on the plane home. She still had it saved in a folder on her phone labeled, "Lily Things, Do Not Delete." The filing did not mention the video. She called Meg at 9 that night. She picked up the phone and tried to say something and could not find the words for it, so she just breathed. Meg said, "I'm getting in my car." Caroline said, "Don't." Meg said, "Already driving." She arrived 20 minutes later with a container of soup she had made, apparently, in the time between the phone call and getting in the car, which was physically implausible, but Meg had always operated outside normal constraints. They sat at the kitchen table, and Meg ate soup, and Caroline held a mug of tea, and after a long time Meg said, "You know what they're actually saying, right? They're saying, a woman isn't allowed to be good at her job without it being evidence that she's bad at everything else. I know what they're saying. It's garbage. I know that too. You're the best mother I've ever watched up close," Meg said, with the flat certainty of someone reporting a fact. "And I work in an ER where I see parents every single day in crisis. I know what it looks like when a child is cherished. Lily is cherished. Every teacher she's ever had knows it. Every friend's parent knows it. Her pediatrician knows it. The custody evaluator will know it." Caroline looked at her mug. "I missed 67 nights," she said. "You were home 298 nights," Meg said. Every morning she wasn't in school, every weekend, every time she was sick, every nightmare, every Saturday morning, with the marine biology documentaries she makes you watch, even though you've seen every episode. I do actually like those documentaries. I know you do. That's the point. Meg put down her spoon. "Fight this, Caroline. Don't let him take this from you too." Caroline looked out the window at the dark backyard, where the rose garden was invisible in the October night. "Pull together everything," Caroline told Patrick the next morning. "Every school record, every medical appointment, every event I attended. And pull her teacher contacts, all of them." "Already started," Patrick said. "And Patrick, the notes in the lunch bag. I have 4 years of them." A pause. "The handwritten notes?" "Every school day I was traveling. I wrote them the night before and put them in her bag before I left. She texted me photos of them sometimes. I have all the texts." Patrick was quiet for a moment. "Caroline," he said, "that might be the most important piece of evidence in this entire case." Savannah Cole's blog post went live on a Friday morning at 9 a.m. By 10:30, it had 40,000 views. By noon, it had passed 300,000. By the time Caroline's phone started ringing with texts from people in her professional network, it had crossed 1 million and was trending on 3 different platforms. The post was titled, "Starting Over, Why I Chose Love Over Judgment." It was 2,800 words. It had a professionally shot photograph at the top, Savannah in a cream-colored linen shirt, soft morning light, looking contemplative and unfairly pretty in the way that people who make their living being photographed are. It did not name Caroline. It did not need to. It described, in the carefully constructed vocabulary of the wellness internet, a relationship that had been empty for years before I arrived. It described James as a man who had been emotionally alone inside his marriage for longer than I can imagine. It described the unnamed first wife as a cold and controlling presence who treated her home like a managed asset and her husband like a line item on a spreadsheet. It included, in the lifestyle section near the bottom, a photograph of Savannah standing at Caroline's kitchen counter, holding Caroline's Le Creuset Dutch oven, the 7-quart one in the deep teal color that Caroline had bought herself as a birthday present 3 years ago, making what the caption described as Sunday soup for two. The Dutch oven was visible in the foreground. The rose garden was visible through the window behind her. Caroline's kitchen, Caroline's pot, Caroline's garden, posted to 3 million followers as proof of a new beginning. Meg's text arrived within 45 seconds of Caroline opening the article. The text said, "She used your $400 pot to make her manifesto soup. I would genuinely consider a felony charge over this. Thinking of you." Caroline stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she called Patrick. "We need to discuss optics," Patrick said, before she could speak. "I don't do optics, Patrick. You do now. She just described you as an emotionally unavailable sociopath to approximately 3 million people, some of whom are your investors." How many of my investors follow a 26-year-old lifestyle blogger? More than you'd think. The post is being reshared in the entrepreneurship community specifically. There's a framing developing. Powerful businesswoman too busy for human connection. It's going to affect your professional relationships if we don't address it. Caroline stood at her office window. The Nashville property was performing at 9.6%. She had a call in 40 minutes with the board of a retail development she was considering acquiring in Denver. Her CFO had emailed at 7 this morning with the preliminary numbers, and they were good. Her life was entirely intact. Her company was thriving. Her daughter was at school right now, and in her lunch bag, there was a turkey sandwich and a note that said, "The mimic octopus is the most unbiased, underrated animal on the planet." I checked. Your position is well supported by the scientific literature. Love, Mom. And somewhere on the internet, a woman in Caroline's kitchen, wearing James's sweatshirt, was explaining to 3 million people why Caroline deserved what was happening to her. "Write a statement," Patrick said. "One paragraph, dignified, something we can put out through the company communications channel." "No," Caroline said. "Caroline, if I respond, I validate it as a conversation. It's not a conversation. It's a performance push for followers. My responding is what she needs to keep the story alive." She turned from the window. "Let it run. Document the reach. We'll use it later." "Use it how?" "I don't know yet." But 3 million people watched her describe the interior of my kitchen. That's evidence of access. That's a timeline. Save all of it. Patrick was quiet for a moment. "You know," he said, "sometimes you are actually alarming. Is that a professional assessment?" "It's an admiring one," he said. She hung up and went back to work. She did not read the comments section. She did not check the post again. She made notes for the Denver acquisition call, reviewed the Nashville numbers one more time, and at 3:45, she left the office to pick up Lily from school. Lily got in the car and immediately said, "The mimic octopus note was my favorite one you've ever written. Piper wanted to know if your position was actually supported by the scientific literature or if you were just saying that." What did you tell her? I told her my mom doesn't bluff. Caroline pulled out of the school lot and thought, no, I don't. 3 weeks after the blog post, James called Patrick. Not through Victor. James himself, on Patrick's direct line at 8 in the evening, which told Caroline that whatever was being offered was something James wanted to feel personal about, something he wanted credit for. The offer was straightforward. James would withdraw the custody motion entirely. He would accept a financial split that, while favorable to himself, was within the range Patrick had described to Caroline as defensible. He wanted the Vermont property and a cash payment. He would release any claim to Whitfield Capital Holdings on the grounds that it had been established before the marriage using premarital assets, which was technically accurate and conveniently ignored 9 years of marital period growth. Caroline would get the Greenwich house, primary custody, and her company. Patrick presented it at 9 the following morning, sitting across from Caroline in his office with a yellow legal pad and his coffee in the mug that said "World's Okayest Attorney," that his daughter had given him as a joke gift 4 Christmases ago and that he used every single day. The custody withdrawal alone is significant, Patrick said. He knows we'd win the full hearing, but a hearing means testimony, which means Lily, potentially, has to speak to a guardian, ad litem, about her preferences. That's hard on kids. He knows I'd do anything to protect Lily from that process, Caroline said. Yes, he's using that. He's leveraging it. Yes. Caroline looked out Patrick's window. It was November now. The trees along the street had gone bare. The sky was the flat gray of a Connecticut winter assembling itself. She thought about the Vermont property. She had renovated it herself, largely. She had picked out the kitchen fixtures and the bathroom tile and the wood stain on the deck. She had spent 2 Augusts there with Lily when Lily was 6 and 7, teaching her to kayak on the lake. She did not want James to have it, but she also did not want Lily in a guardian ad litem interview. Draw up the preliminary agreement, she said. Patrick made a note. She drove from his office to Lily's school and sat in the parking lot, watching the kids come out at 3:15. Lily emerged in the middle of a group. Backpack over one shoulder, laughing at something a friend had said, unaware that she was being watched by her mother, who was sitting in a car in a parking lot, calculating the price of protecting her. She called Meg. I think it might be okay, Caroline said. He offered to settle. Fair terms. Drops the custody motion. Meg was quiet for exactly 1 beat too long. What? Caroline said. Nothing, Meg said. That's good. That's really good. You have a tone. I don't have a tone. I have a voice. It's the same one I always have. Meg. Famous last words in every horror movie, Meg said, are, I think it's over. But okay. I hope it is. I really do. Caroline watched Lily spot the car and start walking toward it, and she thought, it's going to be okay. The worst is behind us. It was not behind them. The call came at 6:17 the following Tuesday morning. Patrick's voice, when she answered, had a particular quality she had not heard before. Not alarm, exactly. The carefully controlled tone of a man delivering information that requires the recipient to stay calm. So he himself must demonstrate calm as a model. I need you to come to the office, he said. There's something you need to see. Tell me now. A pause. Robert Ashford has been acquiring shares of Whitfield Capital Holdings, Patrick said, through shell companies for 14 months. The room was very quiet. How much? Caroline said. 11%. So, not a controlling position, but enough to call a shareholder meeting, enough to create noise and instability. Robert, Caroline said. Not a question, a reckoning. Robert Ashford was 56 years old. He had been James's business partner for 11 years. He had called Caroline twice in the past 3 months to check in, to express sympathy, to tell her he admired how well she was handling a difficult situation. He had sent flowers to the house after the separation, pale pink peonies, her favorite. He had known they were her favorite because she had mentioned it at dinner 18 months ago at a dinner he and James had attended together. "There's more," Patrick said. She waited. "Robert and James have a written agreement," Patrick said, "signed 8 months ago, before the divorce was filed. The agreement stipulates that if James can pressure you into a rushed settlement, specifically by creating custody anxiety, Robert gets first right of purchase on your majority stake in Whitfield Capital at a valuation 40% below current market." Caroline sat down on the edge of her bed 8 months ago, 1 month before James served the divorce papers. The custody motion, the blog post, the settlement offer, all of it choreographed, all of it with a destination she had not been able to see because she had been focused on the personal devastation and not looked far enough back to find the financial motive underneath it. Her marriage had not ended. It had been executed. "Cancel the settlement," she said. "Caroline, cancel it and call Dorothy." Dorothy Whitfield had not spoken to her son in 4 months. The last time had been his birthday dinner, which Dorothy had hosted at her home in Westport with the precision and care she applied to every occasion. Linen tablecloth, the good china, a standing rib roast she had spent the better part of a Sunday preparing. James had arrived 40 minutes late with Savannah Cole on his arm, introduced her without preamble, and then announced over the first course that he was finally living authentically. Dorothy had looked at Savannah, then at the roast, then back at her son. "I worked on this roast for 6 hours," she said. "It deserved a better occasion." She boxed up the remaining roast, handed it to Savannah, said, "For the road," told James she would be in touch when she had something worth saying to him, and went to bed at 8:45. She arrived at Patrick's office on a Wednesday morning in a charcoal blazer, pearl drop earrings, and reading glasses on a gold chain. She carried a cane she had been using for 2 years following a hip replacement, and which she deployed with the authority of a woman who had earned every accessory she owned. She sat down across from Patrick, accepted the document stack he placed in front of her, and read for 18 minutes without speaking. Patrick offered her coffee. "Is it real coffee or the pod kind?" Dorothy asked. Patrick admitted it was the pod kind. Dorothy opened her handbag and produced a stainless steel thermos. "I came prepared," she said, and poured herself a cup. She finished reading. She set the documents down with the deliberate placement of someone who has made a decision. "He used the boys' trust funds," she said. Not a question. "Lily's education trust," Patrick confirmed. $340,000, liquidated over 6 months, used to cover personal expenses. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. And Robert Ashford knew about this arrangement. Robert's shell companies started acquiring shares of Whitfield Capital 2 months before Lily's trust was touched. The timing suggests the education trust was used specifically to fund the lifestyle required to maintain the fiction of James's financial health during the acquisition period. Dorothy folded her hands on the table. "When James was 38, she said, Sterling Tech was failing. He had overextended, made poor hires, burned through his venture capital. He was, to use the technical term, finished." She looked at Patrick. "Caroline came to me. She had identified a path to stability. A restructuring plan she had developed herself, with capital she had set aside from Whitfield Capital's early returns. She wanted my blessing to invest in the company without James knowing the source of the funds." Patrick went still. "She documented the investment as a personal loan," Dorothy continued. $2.1 million. Notarized, witnessed, with a clause that she had insisted on and that I had encouraged. If the marriage dissolved due to James's infidelity or abandonment, the loan became immediately callable at 200% of principal. The office was very quiet. She saved his company, Patrick said. She saved his company, his reputation, and his ability to be the person he told everyone he was, Dorothy said. She did it quietly, without credit, and without telling him the full terms of the arrangement, because she believed he would never violate them. She picked up her thermos. She was wrong about that, but she was right about the paperwork. Patrick leaned back in his chair. So James currently owes Caroline $4.2 million, Dorothy said. Callable on demand. I have the original documents in my safe at home, along with copies I had made 12 years ago and deposited with my estate attorney. She looked at Patrick with the expression of a woman who has been playing a longer game than anyone in the room realized. I have been waiting for a reason to use them. I am sorry the reason is what it is, but I am glad the reason finally arrived. She set down her thermos. Now, she said, tell me about the shareholder meeting. The shareholder meeting of Whitfield Capital Holdings was called for a Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Robert Ashford arrived looking comfortable. He wore the expression of a man who has positioned himself well and is waiting for the board to acknowledge it. He had his own attorney. He had documents. He had, as far as he understood the situation, 11% of a $4.2 billion company and a written agreement that was about to become extremely valuable. He had not accounted for Caroline, or Dorothy, or Meg, who had taken a personal day from the hospital and was sitting in the back of the conference room as emotional support, which in Meg's case meant bearing witness and occasionally providing real-time commentary under her breath. Patrick opened the meeting. He presented the evidence of the coordinated acquisition scheme, the shell companies, the 14-month timeline, the written agreement between Robert and James, obtained through discovery, detailing the plan to pressure Caroline into a below-market sale through manufactured personal crisis. He placed each document on the table in sequence with the deliberate patience of a man who has been looking forward to this specific morning for a long time. Robert's attorney leaned over and whispered something. Robert's face, which had been composed throughout, began to do something more complicated. Patrick slid the final document across the table. This is the SEC referral, Patrick said, filed this morning. Undisclosed conflict of interest, coordinated share acquisition using fraudulent shell entities, breach of fiduciary duty to existing shareholders. Your attorney will want to review the specific statutes cited on page 4. Robert's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. His own attorney was calling him, which meant his own attorney had already been reached by someone at the SEC, which meant this was not a bluff. Robert stood up. He looked at Caroline. Caroline looked back at him with the polite, attentive expression she used in meetings when someone was saying something she had already fully anticipated. Robert picked up his phone and walked out of the room without another word. Meg leaned over to Caroline and whispered. His face went to the color of old oatmeal. This is genuinely the best Thursday I've had in years. The loan recall was filed the same morning. Patrick served James personally through Victor Crane, who called Patrick at 11:15, sounding like a man who had just been handed a bill he could not pay. $4.2 million, Victor said. Callable on demand, Patrick confirmed, per the terms of the original agreement, which I can email you in the next 60 seconds if you'd like to review the clause language. His personal liquidity is approximately $3.1 million. Yes, we're aware. Patrick paused. James has options. He can liquidate assets to cover the shortfall. He can negotiate a payment structure, or he can contest the loan, in which case we'll be deposing everyone who was present when the loan was originated, including his mother, who is an extremely credible witness and has already indicated she is delighted to testify. Victor was quiet for a moment. "I'll call you back," Victor said. The third move required Caroline to do something she had not done in 14 years of building her company in deliberate privacy. She gave an interview, not to a gossip outlet, to a financial journalist at a publication that covered commercial real estate. The journalist had been trying to profile Whitfield Capital for 2 years, and Caroline had declined every request. She said yes on a Thursday afternoon and sat down on Friday morning and spoke for 45 minutes about building a $4.2 billion company from a single property acquisition. About the 9 years of early mornings and late nights and decisions made on information, while everyone around her was working from assumption. About what it meant to be called a hobby. She did not mention James by name. She did not need to. The article ran the following Monday under the headline, "The Quiet Empire: How Caroline Whitfield Built a Billion-Dollar Real Estate Portfolio Nobody Saw Coming." Savannah Cole's blog post was still getting residual traffic. The financial article got more in its first day. The framing shifted, quietly, then decisively, the way things shift when the information finally catches up to the narrative. Caroline read the Watch article once, set it aside, and went back to work. The annual Greenwich Children's Hospital Gala had been Caroline's event for 11 years. She had chaired the committee, managed the vendors, and cultivated the donor relationships that had grown the annual fundraising total from $40,000 to $1.2 million. She had considered not attending this year. Meg had said, "If you don't show up to your own event, he gets to stand in the room you built and pretend he belongs there. Go." So she went. She wore a deep green velvet dress and her mother's pearl earrings, and she arrived early, the way she always did, because arriving early to an event you have organized is a habit of competence that does not go away because your personal life is in reconstruction. Dorothy arrived 20 minutes later in black silk and the pearl drops she wore for formal occasions. Patrick arrived in a tuxedo that fit him better than expected, carrying the manila folder Caroline had asked him to bring. Meg arrived in a floor-length burgundy dress that she had bought for the occasion specifically because, as she explained to Caroline, if I'm going to watch a man get his entire situation dismantled at a charity gala, I'm going to be dressed for it. James arrived at 8:15 with Savannah on his arm. He had been telling people the settlement was basically done. He had been telling people Caroline was being gracious about it. He was planning, Caroline knew through Patrick, to use tonight to announce the engagement formally, in this room, at this event, because he had apparently not fully absorbed what the past 3 months had demonstrated about how well his plans tended to land. He looked confident when he walked in. He looked like a man arriving at a party he owned. He crossed the room. He found Caroline near the entrance to the terrace. He was going to say something charming and dismissive, something that would establish his dominance in this room in front of these people. She could see him assembling it. His CFO intercepted him 6 feet from Caroline. The CFO leaned in and said something very quietly. James's face did the recalibration thing, the almost imperceptible shift that happens when a mind is rapidly processing information that does not fit the existing model. He took out his phone. He read something. He looked up and across the room. He found Caroline's face. She was standing with Dorothy, holding a glass of sparkling water. She raised the glass very slightly when their eyes met. Not a toast, an acknowledgement. The simple recognition of a woman who knew exactly where she was and exactly how she had gotten there. James walked toward her. Dorothy stepped directly into his path. She was several inches shorter than her son. She had a cane and reading glasses on a chain, and she was 74 years old. She stopped him completely. "James Edward Whitfield," Dorothy said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the crystalline quality of someone who has never in her life needed volume to be heard. "You have the legal right to remain silent. I would strongly recommend you exercise it tonight." James looked at her, then past her, at Caroline. "Mother, I just want to—" "No," Dorothy said. One word. 47 years of maternal authority concentrated into a single syllable. James stopped. Caroline watched him stand there, and she recognized the expression on his face because she had felt a version of it herself 18 months ago, sitting at a kitchen table after her daughter called from a school trip to tell her about a woman in a blue sweatshirt. The expression of someone whose understanding of the situation has just collapsed and has not yet been replaced by anything else. She did not feel satisfaction exactly. She felt the specific, quiet relief of a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. She turned back to her conversation. Savannah found her in the coat check 20 minutes later. Away from the crowd, in the narrow corridor, where the coats hung in long rows and the noise of the party was muffled and distant, Savannah was not performing anything in that moment. She looked for the first time like what she actually was, a 26-year-old who had made a significant decision based on incomplete information and was now standing in the coat check of a charity gala, beginning to understand the full dimensions of what she had walked into. "He told me you were done," Savannah said, "that the marriage had been over for years, that you didn't care." Caroline looked at her. She thought about the wedding photograph on her office shelf. She thought about the roses in the backyard. She thought about every note she had ever tucked into Lily's lunch bag. "Did you ask me?" Caroline said. Savannah had no answer. "I don't hate you," Caroline said, "but I don't forgive you either. What you should know, the man you chose had a written contract to sell my company to his business partner the same week he filed for divorce. He wasn't leaving a dead marriage. He was executing a corporate raid. You were part of the cover story." Savannah went pale. "He used both of us, Caroline." "Both of us," Caroline said. "The difference is, I found out." She took her coat from the attendant. She walked back into the party. At 11:15, James attempted to leave through the main entrance. Private security, hired by Caroline, on Patrick's recommendation, 6 days in advance, declined to allow it until the eviction paperwork was properly served. Victor Crane's firm had already filed a motion to contest, but the motion had not yet been heard, which meant the paperwork stood, which meant James stood in the marble foyer of the Greenwich Children's Hospital Gala for 4 minutes while security waited for his attorney to arrive. Dorothy watched from the doorway to the ballroom. "He has his grandfather's stubborn chin," she said to Meg, who was standing beside her with a glass of champagne. "It has never once helped him." Meg raised her glass. "To the cane," Meg said. Dorothy considered this. "To the cane," she agreed. 6 months later, the morning light came through the kitchen windows of the Greenwich Colonial at the particular angle it only reached in April, when the sun had climbed high enough to clear the oak trees at the back of the property and lay itself across the kitchen floor in long, pale rectangles. Carolyn sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and the preliminary numbers on a mixed-use development in Charlotte, North Carolina. 48 units, projected return 11.2%. It was good. She made a note in the margin and circled the projected return twice. From upstairs, "Mom, I can't find my left cleat. It's in the mudroom, behind the boots." "Which boots?" "The tall ones." Pause. "Found it." Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, in her soccer uniform, backpack over one shoulder, already eating an apple. She was 12 now, and had recently decided that the mantis shrimp had displaced the mimic octopus as the most underrated animal on the planet, a position she had defended at length at the dinner table on 4 separate occasions. Grandma says she can't sign my permission slip because you're technically the boss of the schedule, Lily said. Grandma is right. Caroline held out her hand. Lily passed the slip. Caroline signed it and handed it back. From the living room, Dorothy's voice. The crossword wants a 7-letter word for ruthless negotiator. I've penciled in your name. Is that inappropriate? Use ink, Caroline said. A pause. I always use ink, Dorothy said. With the dignity of a woman who has never once in her life used pencil, Dorothy had been staying at the house since January, ostensibly to help with Lily's schedule during the transition. Actually because, as she had explained to Caroline one evening, over dinner, she was 74 years old and had spent 4 months alone in Westport being annoyed and would prefer to be useful. Caroline had said there was plenty of room. Dorothy had moved in the following weekend and had been doing the crossword in the armchair by the living room window every morning since. The condition Dorothy had mentioned to Lucas, the one she was managing, the one she had described as not immediately life-threatening, but certainly a clock, had stabilized over the winter under a new treatment protocol. Her doctor used the word encouraging. Dorothy used the word acceptable, which for Dorothy was essentially the same thing. Patrick called at 9. The SEC investigation has expanded, he said. 3 additional investors have come forward with evidence of similar shell company acquisition schemes Robert ran on previous targets. The exposure is significant. Is there anything I need to do? Not today. I wanted you to know. Thank you, Patrick. How are you? She looked at the Charlotte numbers, at Lily's departing footsteps on the stairs, at the April light on the kitchen floor. Good, she said, and meant it. She hung up. She carried her coffee to the back door and stepped out onto the terrace. The rose garden. She had almost let it go in the fall. There had been a week in October when she had walked past it every day without stopping, because stopping meant something she was not ready for. The garden was the first thing she had planted here, the first thing that was purely hers in a house that had held so much that was not. She had started tending it again in February. Slow work, cold weather work, the kind where you cannot see results for weeks, and you have to trust that what you are doing is having an effect, even when the evidence is not visible yet. One rose had bloomed overnight. Not perfect. A little ragged at the edges, the outer petals still unfurling, but open. She crouched down and looked at it for a long time. She thought about the courtroom on that Monday morning, 18 months ago, the document sliding across the table, James's face when he saw the number. She thought about Lily on the phone saying, "There's a lady here, in our kitchen," in that careful voice children use when they are protecting their parents. She thought about Patrick reading Victor Crane's letter aloud on the phone. He called you Mrs. Whitfield in a letter about taking your assets, and the 4 seconds she and Meg had laughed in the hallway outside the conference room before the world resumed. She thought about the notes in the lunch bag, all 4 years of them. The Guardian ad litem had asked to keep copies. The judge had asked Patrick to stop reading them into the record after the 4th one, because she had, as she said, seen enough. She stood up. The Charlotte numbers were good. The rose was open. Lily was going to be late for soccer if she did not leave in the next 4 minutes, which meant Caroline needed to locate the car keys that Lily had almost certainly put in the wrong place, which was a problem she had solved 300 times and would solve 300 more. Dorothy called from inside. Caroline, your daughter has put her cleats in the fruit bowl. I don't know how this happened, but I am not responsible. I'll handle it, Carolyn called back. She turned away from the garden and walked back into the house, into the kitchen that was hers, into the morning that was ordinary and complicated and entirely her own. The rose would still be there when she got back. She thought about something she had read once in a book she had picked up at an airport years ago and then lost on a plane and never replaced. The difference between people who rebuild and people who don't is not resilience. Resilience sounds like endurance, like suffering through. The real difference is that some people, when they finally see clearly, choose to build something better than what they had before. She had 14 years of practice at building things. She was just getting started. Closing disclaimer. The story you have just heard was researched, constructed, and manually edited by our team with one purpose: to bring you content that means something. Every detail, every character, every turning point was shaped by hand, not to entertain alone, but to reflect something true about resilience, dignity, and the long, unglamorous, deeply human work of rebuilding a life on your own terms. We are grateful you stayed until the end.